Chapter 11. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. 1. Hair moves the whole body. 3. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. He walked out of the inspection office. The scorching sun had already set, and the sky was red with evening glow. There weren't many people outside because the weather was hot and stuffy. Recent days had seen even hotter weather till 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. Li Hao's house wasn't very far from the inspection office. It was only 7 or 8 kilometers away. Li Hao got onto his bicycle. He always rode to work on it. He first did it to train his body but realized that it would come in handy if he had to avoid danger. In a place with too many people, it was always tricky to pinpoint danger. Li Hao had remained very cautious, especially after Zhang Yuan's death. Li Hao looked very casual riding on his bicycle, but he always looked around to make sure he was safe. He looked as though he was admiring the place and the scenery, but in reality, he was making sure if anyone was following him. He was strung tight especially today because he was very sure that he was the next target. Li Hao couldn't help but wonder how the red shadow had located him. According to what Li Hao knew so far, the red shadow wouldn't appear for long. Every time it appeared, it disappeared that fast. It didn't stay outside for too long. If that was the case, how was it able to locate him? Did that mean that there were people observing him and informing the shadow? That was not entirely impossible. Although he was not in the law enforcement team, he still had basic anti-reconnaissance skills. I haven't found anything of importance yet. Could it be that the red shadow can directly locate its victims? Does it have anything to do with the starry sky sword? Could the red shadow track the families through their heirlooms, wondered Li Hao. The bicycle moved slowly. Li Hao had placed the Vortex Mk3 in the inner pocket of his shirt. His outer shirt was unbuttoned as though he was getting some air, but the truth was that it would be less of a hurdle if he had to get the gun urgently. As usual, Li Hao didn't encounter any problem. When he rode down a slope and his bicycle speeded up, his heart skipped a beat. As he rode down, Li Hao saw a black car from the corner of his eyes. The car drove towards him from the opposite lane. It looked very ordinary and seemed no different than the other cars in the vicinity. Silver 7219. Li Hao was shocked. He had seen that car before. Although these kind of cars were all over the street, Li Hao remembered the number on the license plate. Li Hao used to be a student of Silver City Ancient Academy. He had his own outstanding qualities, after all. Having a good memory was a must. If he didn't have that, he wouldn't have been chosen by Professor Yuan to be his student. Something's not right. The car was going in the same direction as me. It should have already passed me and left. But the car has been following me for about 7 minutes now. The car had driven back towards Li Hao. He remained calm and composed. But he was curious. Why is it following me, thought Li Hao. Li Hao regretted not considering this possibility sooner. The case he reported to Wang Jie must have leaked somehow. There is a mole at the inspection office, realized Li Hao. He also thought that it was someone probably in the law enforcement team. Li Hao felt anxious. But he thought this wasn't a coincidence for sure. The head of the royal family must have gone to the law enforcement team to suppress the self-immolation cases. But if the law enforcement team knows I am digging the cases up again, they might already have their eyes on me. They could have just talked with me directly. They didn't need to follow me around. On the surface, it only looks like I am giving special attention to this case because my friend's death, people who did see the red shadow were discovered very quickly in the past. Maybe my suspicions were right. There is a spy among the inspection division or the night patrollers. Li Hao had read the files. The people who saw the red shadow were either dead or missing. That was hard to notice if someone wasn't paying special attention to it. Many patrol officers would only give the files a perfunctory glance when they had to organize them. They would have just recorded and archived the files without spending much time on it. Because it didn't matter. But to Li Hao, it did. Someone from the whole inspection division would have paid special attention to the one digging up past cases. This kind of thing reached people's ears too quickly. How long have I been watched, thought Li Hao. If it is to do with the cases, it could be considered an accidental finding on my part. I have never told a soul about the red shadow after Zhang Yuan's death. They probably don't know that I can see it. He was a level 3 patrol officer. He had found a pattern in the cases while organizing them. Even if someone was in league with the red shadow, they wouldn't outright target him just because he had found something in the office. That would be too risky. If they killed him, then it would raise a lot of questions. It would prove that there was something wrong with the self-immolation cases. That would be troublesome to whoever was following him. It's getting more and more interesting, admitted Li Hao. He ignored the car and rode on, pretending to be unaware. The car, he noticed, disappeared quickly from sight. Silver 7219. In the car was a middle-aged male driver and an ordinary middle-aged woman in the front passenger seat. At a glance, they looked like regular middle-aged couple. I didn't find anything, said the woman in a low voice as the car drove away from Li Hao. The driver didn't seem to hear her. He responded in a calm manner after a while. It should have been brushed off as an accident. He is taking quite an interest in Zhang Yuan's death. They used to be good friends, apparently. The woman nodded. The car returned to silence once more. We can't rule anything out for now. Just keep watching them from a distance. Be careful. Those annoying people are coming to the Silver City soon, said the driver. Understood. The woman nodded. She knew who the driver meant. Those guys were indeed annoying. The car fell completely silent once again. Chapter 12. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Black Panther, 1, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. I am being watched. Li Hao stopped his bicycle in front of the gate of the neighborhood and slowly pushed it forward. Little Hao, you're back, greeted one of his neighbors. Patrol Officer Li, do you have time to come over for a drink tonight? Asked another. The residents of the area who were outside enjoying the cool evening air always greeted him so enthusiastically. A level 3 patrol officer might be the lowest rank in the inspection office, but in the community, they were a symbol of security. They were thought of highly. Even though Li Hao didn't look as strong as the other patrol officers, he was always treated respectfully because of his job. Hello, he smiled at them. Qiming District was an old district that had been around for many years. The district was a little dilapidated now, but as far as Li Hao could remember, the Li family had always lived in the Qiming District. The neighborhood wasn't very big, with a total of only 6 buildings. Li Hao lived in the innermost building, Block 6, in room 302. Li Hao did not ride his bicycle all the way to his block, instead he pushed it along the rundown road. The roads in Qiming District had not been repaired for a long time, so they were in ruins. It was very bumpy and his bicycle occasionally bounced as he pushed it. Behind him, he could still hear the faint whispers of his neighbors. Little Hao is good and polite, but without an elder to look after him, he worries me. I heard it is very difficult to get into the Silver City Ancient Academy, and he managed it. But it's a pity he dropped out of school to be a patrol officer. You can't say that. The inspection office is good. It's true that the inspection office will provide him with a secure job, but if he had graduated from the academy, he would have had a brighter future and would have been paid more. Li Hao was used to the discussion. Over the past year, he had heard it so many times. He ignored it. He did not explain his standing, nor did he care. There was no need. He was still processing the thing that had just come to pass. And wondering what he should do to deal with it. Although the gun provided him with a certain sense of security, he was not completely safe. I still lack knowledge of the mysterious power. My combat ability is also limited. Without a gun, I'm just an ordinary person, thought Li Hao. Li Hao had learned some close-range combat techniques. This was taught not only in the training but also in his 2 years in the Silver City Ancient Academy. His professor, Yuan Shua, was not only a scholar but also a master of combat skills. Yuan Shua did not intend to fight anybody for that matter. But he liked to keep in shape and maintain flexibility. According to Professor Yuan, one could at least run faster in the face of danger, if nothing else. Every time a professor from the academy went out, danger followed. Therefore, Li Hao had trained too. He wasn't very proficient in it. But if he was to fight the ordinary gangsters in the area, he could do it. He wasn't as good as the old patrol officers though. The chief patrol officer's identity might not really seem very intimidating, but he was always prepared for a fight, if need be, thought Li Hao as he walked to his block. Suddenly a black shadow flashed by his feet but was gone the next instant. Li Hao's mind and body was on high alert, so much so that he wanted to act. But he restrained himself. The black puppy in front of him stopped. It didn't bark but looked at Li Hao with eager eyes, as if expecting something. Li Hao let out a laugh. He parked his bicycle and beckoned to the puppy. Black Panther. You certainly live up to your name. The puppy looked small and adorable, but Li Hao had still given him a formidable name. Black Panther didn't belong to Li Hao. It was a stray that had appeared in the neighborhood one day. Li Hao lived alone, but it was a pity when he had to throw the leftover food. So, he fed the dog occasionally. After a few months, the dog had chosen to stay with Li Hao and stopped wandering around. In the day, it would always lie down at the entrance of Block 6 and wait for Li Hao to come home. There were others in Block 6 who didn't like the dog. But they knew Li Hao fed it, so they never chased it away. No one wanted to go against a level 3 patrol officer. Black Panther wasn't noisy, and the neighbors had gotten used to it. Li Hao squatted down and patted its head. Living alone could sometimes get very lonely, especially when he had things weighing down on his heart constantly. Having a dog by his side was comforting. Unfortunately, Li Hao was too busy to take care of it constantly. At most, Li Hao fed Black Panther at night only. Sometimes in the day, he left some dog food out in a container. But Black Panther usually found its own food during the day. Woof! The little dog wagged its tail eagerly. Li Hao smiled. Come along then. I will give you some food. His smile was genuine and gentle with the dog. Then at the inspection office, he got up and started up the stairs. The building was old and the stairs were worn. The rails were also rusty with the paint that had peeled off a long time ago. Half of the people in the 6-storied building had already moved away. There were only a few elderlies who lived here now. Li Hao didn't move out. He didn't have enough money to buy a house in the new neighborhood. He didn't want to part from here. This was the place he had always lived in. Black Panther ran upstairs with Li Hao. Room 302, read the number on the door. Li Hao opened the door and entered. The room was dark because the curtains were closed. The house wasn't very big. Li Hao opened the door all the way through, but Black Panther did not enter. It just lay at the threshold waiting for Li Hao to feed it. Li Hao wasn't in the mood to cook today. He found the dog food that was going to expire soon. He pulled out Black Panther's container and poured a lot of dog food. He then placed it just outside his door. Woof! Black Panther wagged its tail again and looked at Li Hao expectantly. I didn't buy any groceries today. So that will have to do, said Li Hao. He didn't understand why Black Panther didn't eat the food. Perhaps it was disgusted because the food was going to expire in a few days. Chapter 13. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Black Panther, 2, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, it's good. Try some. Don't turn your nose up at it. In a few days, you might not have anyone to feed you. You should find some other way to feed yourself. Li Hao crouched down and patted the dog. He laughed as he saw the dog eat the food unwillingly. He took out the Vortex Mk3 from his pocket. After some hesitation, he took off the jade pendant from his neck. Li Hao fell into a deep thought. Was this jade pendant related to a mysterious power? Could it be that the 8 great families of the Silver City song were also involved in something supernatural? He had never seen or felt anything out of the ordinary about his jade pendant. As for the blood ownership mentioned in the song, he didn't know if being injured when young and his pendant getting stained counted as Starry Sky Sword, mumbled Li Hao. Was this the Red Shadow's target? Woof! Black Panther suddenly stopped eating and barked at the jade pendant in Li Hao's hands. Li Hao looked at Black Panther. The Black Panther faced the jade pendant, wagging its tail. It looked like it wanted to approach it but was scared to do so. It kept a safe distance and started at the pendant. Li Hao raised his eyebrows. He playfully pretended to stab at Black Panther. The dog jumped away immediately and barked at Li Hao as if it was frightened. Li Hao was surprised. Was the dog afraid of this trinket? That was interesting. According to some folklores, white cats and black dogs could see things that normal human eyes couldn't. Could it be that Black Panther could see something in the jade pendant that Li Hao couldn't? Li Hao knew that Black Panther was a smart dog. Black Panther, come here, said Li Hao. The dog looked hesitant but slowly moved over to him, its eyes fixed on the jade pendant. Woof! The dog still looked scared but eased a little near Li Hao. Li Hao observed its strange reaction and frowned. Maybe the jade pendant was indeed special. Li Hao was lost in thought when he felt the jade pendant disappear from his hand. The dog had swallowed it. F***ck. Li Hao was stunned for a moment. He grabbed Black Panther's head and tried to gently pry its mouth open. Spit it out. Damn it. He wondered why the dog was acting strange. Usually, it never snatched away the food when it was being fed. Black Panther always waited patiently until Li Hao told it to eat. What was this? Was the dog really scared? Black Panther clamped its teeth shut and refused to open its mouth. Little Hao had to get the pendant back somehow. He pinched the dog's mouth and grabbed its tail, not letting it escape or bite. You ingrate. This is my only family heirloom. Do you have to have that too? Spit it out. Li Hao let go of the dog's tail and grabbed its head. With his other hand, he tried to open its mouth. Finally, Black Panther opened its mouth and the jade pendant slipped out. The Starry Sky Sword was of great importance. He couldn't give it up even if it was dirty and slimy. He picked up the jade pendant and smacked Black Panther's head lightly. To think I feed you when you don't even listen to me. Li Hao chastised it. The dog was usually very mellow. He hadn't expected it to act like this all of a sudden. It was Li Hao's own fault for being too low on his guard against it. It would have taken his pendant. They say that dogs that bite don't bark. That really suits your personality, you know. Li Hao looked at the slimy jade pendant in his hand with disdain. Woof! 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 Black Panther stared at the jade pendant as if reluctant to part with it. The fear it had earlier shown had long since disappeared. It even stuck out its tongue as if it wanted to lick the sword again. However, Li Hao playfully smacked it on its mouth and it retracted its tongue. Woof! Woof! Black Panther looked at Li Hao sheepishly, fawning and pleading as if it wanted to lick the jade pendant again. Li Hao frowned. He glanced at the dog. Black Panther usually wasn't like this. It was always very mellow and obedient. Even when Li Hao brought it food, the dog would wag its tail eagerly but it had never ever snatched the food out of Li Hao's hands. You want to eat this? Li Hao waved the jade pendant in front of the dog. Black Panther wagged its tail, its eyes full of desire. But it hesitated as if making sure of something. The dog, very lightly, shook its head. What? Li Hao was stunned. Did the dog just shake its head? For the longest time Li Hao had assumed that dogs understand humans very well. But shaking its head. Moreover, what did it mean? He didn't want to eat it then. If the dog didn't want to eat it, then why was it staring at the pendant so much? Strange, murmured Li Hao. There must be something special about the starry sky sword. He had, of course, considered it after he had heard the Silver City song. But why was it that Li Hao had not felt anything from it in so many years? Chapter 14. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Black Panther, 3, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. He had a sudden impulse to check it carefully today. So, he had taken it off. He hadn't known Black Panther would react this way. If he hadn't heard the Silver City song, Li Hao would have worn the jade pendant for the rest of his life without ever thinking about it. He would have never examined it. And Black Panther wouldn't have snatched it. Black Panther really wants this. What's so special about the starry sky sword? Li Hao's thoughts started to wander again. While he was distracted, Black Panther didn't snatch the sword again but licked it. Li Hao's hand was covered in saliva. He reached out and wiped his hand on Black Panther's fur. If you ever snatch it away again, I will never give you food. Woof. 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 Black Panther shook its head vigorously and wagged its tail as if to say he didn't mean to snatch it away. Li Hao felt that something was really wrong. He looked at the dog and then at the pendant. The pendant was so slimy now that he might have to wash it thoroughly later. You want to lick it again? Asked Li Hao. Black Panther nodded. Li Hao was stunned. How was the dog able to understand everything he said? Li Hao cautiously held the pendant out. Black Panther glanced at Li Hao and stuck out its tongue and licked the jade pendant. Its eyes filled with satisfaction. Is it that delicious? Asked Li Hao. That would be weird. Li Hao remembered when he was young, he had licked the pendant too. He also recalled that he had never washed it. He had actually put this pendant in his mouth many times when he was a child. The heirloom was supposedly very old. Had it been licked by a dog before? Even if it hadn't, the pendant might be so very dirty now when he thought about it. Who knew how many people had worn it? I can't think about it. It's too disgusting. Li Hao shook his head. Just pretend not to know, said Li Hao to himself. Black Panther is acting strange today. But it does show that the jade pendant is indeed special, speculated Li Hao. Li Hao stood up. His hand and the pendant were covered in Black Panther's saliva. He went to wash it. Li washed his hand and the pendant. Then he poured a bowl of scalding hot water and placed the jade pendant in it to disinfect it. He had to take the pendant with him when he went to Zhang Yuan's house. He was afraid that if he left it anywhere else, it would be stolen. He wondered if the pendant was some kind of protective talisman. Perhaps it would be of some use if he had to face the red shadow. Li Hao didn't dare leave it at home when he knew its significance from the Silver City song. When Zhang Yuan died last year, the red shadow didn't attack him. Li Hao wondered if it was because of the jade pendant. After a while, Li Hao took the pendant from the bowl and washed it under cold water. Just when he was about to throw the water in the bowl, he felt something nudge at his feet. Woof woof. Black Panther had never entered his home before. Usually, Li Hao left food outside because he didn't want it to shed fur in the house. But this time, Black Panther had followed him in. Li Hao looked down at the dog to see it very eagerly watching the bowl in his hand. He had soaked the jade sword in it. Li Hao's heart skipped a beat. He put the bowl on the floor. Black Panther didn't care about the temperature of the water. It stuck out its tongue and gave it a lick. It must be scalding hot, and yet the dog kept lapping it up. Li Hao didn't know what to think about this. He had licked the pendant when he was a child but had never found anything special about it. Li Hao watched the dog in amazement. Black Panther's usually messy and scruffy coat turned smooth and soft right before his eyes. Black Panther's tail wagged happily. Could it be that the water soaked in the jade pendant had some kind of mysterious power, wondered Li Hao. Strange, was that the use of the pendant? Soak it in water and then drink it. Li Hao leaned down and touched Black Panther. The dog indeed felt different to the touch. It was softer and shinier than before. Li Hao looked at the jade pendant in his hand, feeling excited. If the jade pendant had some magical power, it had taken a dog to find out about it. Li Hao had disinfected it in scalding hot water, but he still felt queasy. He wasn't planning to lick the pendant. Li Hao thought about it. Black Panther's fur had turned smooth and soft. That was extraordinary. It must have a mysterious power, after all. Li Hao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was at a loss for words. The dog might have actually found a way to activate the Starry Sky Sword's power. He looked at the Black Panther. The dog was lying down on the ground, satisfied. When it saw Li Hao glancing at it, it wagged its tail even more eagerly. Li Hao thought he saw a hint of intelligence in the dog's eyes that he had never seen before. This dog, it really seems to understand humans, even more than normal. Li Hao was shocked. Li Hao glanced at the jade pendant and felt curious. Black Panther had drunk the water where the pendant was soaked and had benefited. What if I drink it? Would I be able to master the mysterious power that no one else had? If that was true, it would literally be life-saving for Li Hao. What if I die? But that's impossible. I licked it so many times when I was young. It didn't kill Black Panther either. Li Hao couldn't suppress his excitement anymore. He desired power. He wanted to avenge his family and Zhang Yuan. Many things flashed through his mind. Zhang Yuan night patrollers, the Red Shadow, being followed today by that car. Everything seemed to crowd his mind. He had tried everything he could to get into the inspection office and to contact the night patrollers. He now wanted to tap into the mysterious power of his pendant. It was worth a shot. I have to try. If I don't, I might die without ever knowing. The Red Shadow will come after me anyway. The night patrollers might not be reliable. The internal affairs of the inspection office leaked. There is no one I can trust. Li Hao made up his mind. He patted Black Panther's head. If this is really effective, you are in for many treats in the future, Black Panther. You will live a good life with me. Woof. Black Panther barked in anticipation. It seemed to understand him even more. He almost looked as if he couldn't wait for the good life that Li Hao had promised him. Chapter 15. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Book of Five Beasts, 1, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Was it really effective in the water? Li Hao tried to recall his past. He had never taken the pendant off before. He had kept it on even when bathing. It didn't seem to have any remarkable powers in the past. When he was young, he had even put it in his mouth. But this time, it worked. At least it had worked on Black Panther. In the kitchen, Li Hao took a big soup bowl and placed the pendant in it. He added boiling water to it. He wondered if it needed scalding hot water to work. He naturally wouldn't use boiling water to bathe in. Maybe right temperature was needed for the power to work. Maybe in the past, the right temperature was not met for the power to melt and imbue in the water. There hadn't been a significant change when Black Panther had licked it before anyway. It wasn't until Li Hao had placed the pendant in the boiling water and Black Panther had drunk it that his fur had turned smooth and shiny. If boiling water doesn't work, then I will figure something else out, thought Li Hao. What if only dogs can absorb the mysterious substance of the jade? Li Hao was at a war with himself. His heart was in a tumult. Hesitation, excitement, worry. He desired to feel the power of the mystical realm. Perhaps now he would have a way to deal with the red shadow. He needed such power if he was to face the red shadow. People had already started monitoring him. The red shadow would attack him any day now. The night patrollers themselves might be looking for those people who could see the shadow. And if there really was a mole in the inspection office. As he thought about all this, his resolve became stronger. Even if this didn't work, he wouldn't give up. The starry sky sword had already soaked in the boiling water for a while now. There was no distinct change in the water yet. At his feet, Black Panther was drowsy. It was lying on the ground and looking up at the soup bowl lazily. It still looked like it wanted the water, but the urgency and excitement from before was gone. Li Hao sighed. He didn't rush to drink it. He took the bowl and walked out of the kitchen. He locked the front door and drew the curtains close once again. He wanted to make sure no one could see him. Li Hao carried the bowl to the sofa and sat down. He looked at the pendant in the bowl. It looked crystal clear. The Li family sword, maybe there is something special about it if it was passed down from generation to generation, thought Li Hao. Li Hao picked the bowl and gritted his teeth. He placed the gun beside him on the sofa at grabbing distance. He took a small sip. The water was still hot but not so much that it could burn his tongue. He drank a mouthful. There was no reaction at first. He only felt the warmth left by the water in his mouth. Then, a warm current began to spread in his stomach. The sensation quickly disappeared. Li Hao was confused. Was it just my imagination, he thought. Li Hao was sure that it was his mind playing tricks on him. Well, as long as I don't die, he thought, and drank another mouthful. As he drank more and more, the sensation was more real. There really was a warm current spreading in his stomach. He pulled up his shirt and looked at his stomach. There was a faint starlight flickering from within. Li Hao was shocked. Is this a mystical power, he wondered. As he drank more of the water, the starlight seeped into the air. He could see it with his naked eyes. In the next moment, they faded from Li Hao. Benove calm Black Panther opened its eyes and walked towards Li Hao. It stuck out its tongue and licked the air around Li Hao, but his tongue didn't seem to touch anything at all. What is that? Exclaimed Li Hao. He frowned. Is that starlight supposed to be the mysterious power of the jade pendant? He wondered. It was in my stomach, then it seeped out into the air. Was it because I am unable to hold that power? He knew nothing about what this was supposed to mean. He had practiced combat with his professor. There were rules to follow when practicing. If you exercise randomly, it will not help in strengthening your body and you will only end up wasting your energy. Professor Yuan had mentioned that once before. Li Hao felt that it applied to the present situation. He didn't know how to preserve the power, so it flowed out of him. Does it have some kind of rule that I need to follow? Li Hao glanced at Black Panther. The dog might not have known any rules, but it had been able to hold the starlight within its body long enough for the benefits of the water. Li Hao looked at the remaining water in the bowl. He had gathered some knowledge about it. First, the jade pendant really had some kind of mysterious power which manifested in the form of starlight energy, but it needed boiling water to activate it. Second, the energy had some remarkable qualities and benefits, but it could not be preserved. Third, if Li Hao wanted to harness this energy and use it, he needed a secret manual or some kind of system which could help him absorb this energy. Fourth, Li Hao was just throwing ideas and conclusions around for now. He wondered if there were any requirements for the cultivation of the mysterious power, and if he could meet them. Chapter 16. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Book of Five Beasts, 2, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. If others drank this water, would there be similar effects? That was not entirely improbable. But he felt that it was highly unlikely. In a city like the Silver City, word would have gone around if someone with such power existed. Li Hao made a mental note of this. He looked at his skin, there was no change. He didn't have boundless strength as he had imagined. Nor did his hair turn smooth and soft like Black Panther's. It only feels like I have spent my day in the hot spring. My stomach feels warm but otherwise, I don't feel anything at all, thought Li Hao. He sighed, dismayed. How is it that my transformation is worse than a dog's? Am I not even as good as Black Panther? Maybe the change is not so much because it's my first time, thought Li Hao, otherwise it meant he was worse than a dog. This won't do. The starlight energy seems to have been wasted. After it seeped out from my body, it quickly disappeared. Li Hao frowned. He looked at the remaining water in his bowl and did not want to drink more. He was afraid of wasting the starlight energy. Can the starry sky sword be soaked into the water all the time? Or is there a limit to it, pondered Li Hao. There were too many unanswered questions but he didn't want to waste the power just because his body was unable to absorb it. Li Hao suddenly thought of an explanation. Maybe I don't have a source in my body which can store the starlight. It was a very vague guess. I can't let it go to waste. I don't know how long this bowl of water will last. He stood up and paced around the room. Maybe I can find something out from the Book of 5 Beasts that Professor Yuan gave me, he muttered. Professor Yuan's Book of 5 Birds was about a simple technique that could maintain one's health. He had adapted it from the records of some ancient civilization. Professor Yuan was already over 70 years of age but he was very fit. He could even beat Li Hao while walking uphill. The Book of 5 Beasts did not involve specific moves or exercises. It talked about training the muscles and bones of the body to the maximum level. It had nothing to do with mysterious energies. But Li Hao thought that the training in the book would help him retain the starlight energy. He would try it. As for it working or not, he would leave it to fate. The Book of 5 Beasts described the basic reactions of the 5 kinds of animals when they hunted or escaped. The tiger was fierce, the deer was calm, the bear was steady, the ape was agile, and the bird was light. Professor Yuan was particularly skilled in the techniques of apes and birds. Professor Yuan hoped that he could escape as nimbly as a monkey or as lightly as a bird if he was in danger. He wanted to be able to overcome all kinds of obstacles. As for Li Hao, he had only learned the ape art from his teachers during his time at the Silver City Ancient Academy. He had only briefly touched on the other 4 arts and hadn't studied them in depth. It wasn't something that could be mastered in a day, after all. It needed years of perseverance and practice. Let's try, he encouraged himself. He warmed up a little and felt that it was easier for him to get into it than before. He picked up the bowl of water and drank a mouthful. Li Hao was as agile as an ape in the next moment. He raised his heels, kicked his feet, and jumped into the air. His hands were lithe, and he instantly grabbed the hanging ring in the middle of the living room like an ape. Li Hao had installed the hanging rings for the purpose of learning the art of the bird from the Book of 5 Beasts. The art of ape was about agility. This was what Professor Yuan was an expert in. Li Hao's course of study was to make use of his environment to create a faster and the most energy saving method of escape. Li Hao entered that state of mind as his body glided across the room much more agile than before. He grabbed the hanging ring and swung from it for a while. Then, he kicked the wall with both feet and used the force to jump into the air. He then bared his fangs and brandished his claws like an ape. He jumped into the air again and grabbed the back of the sofa. On his hands and feet, Li Hao continued to run around in the small living room. The living room was not big enough but it didn't matter to Li Hao. He glided into the small space making use of every nook and cranny. Li Hao wasn't very muscular. When compared to Zhang Yuan, Li Hao had looked more like a scholar while his friend had looked like a soldier. Li Hao's body was a perfect match to practice the art of the ape. If he had been too big, it would have proved difficult to practice in this small space. Li Hao panted. The seemingly agile art of the ape was extremely exhausting. He also needed to match his breathing to the art he was learning in order to be able to make full use of the technique. Chapter 17. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Book of Five Beasts, 3, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The breathing techniques associated with each art was not some obscure martial art secret. It was just a bunch of training strategies on how to adjust one's breathing, when to inhale and exhale, how to hold your breath without side effects. Of course, it was easier said than done. Professor Yuan, who had written the book, had adapted the habits of the 5 animals into it. To tailor it into a book, he had put a massive amount of energy and time. Therefore, the Book of 5 Beasts was infamous in the Silver City Ancient Academy. Many people knew and practiced it. What Yuan Shua had hidden away were the breathing techniques. He passed this down to only a few of his selected students. Li Hao was one of them. Li Hao's breathing came rapidly as he began to adjust his breathing to the art of the ape. The entire exercise was not that long. It took only about 3 minutes. But those intense 3 minutes were enough to exhaust anyone. Li Hao had practiced this particular exercise for 2 years and still, he could barely complete it twice. After 6 minutes, he was so exhausted that he was almost unable to get up from the floor. His professor, who was over 70 years old, could do this exercise for 15 minutes at a stretch. Li Hao had always found it hard to believe that such high-intensity, high-speed, and extremely exhaustive exercise could be maintained for 15 minutes. It meant that Professor Yuan could probably run like a monkey for 15 minutes in the face of danger without compromising his strength. Li Hao did not have time to think about that. Under Black Panther's confused gaze, Li Hao moved quickly. The tables, chairs, sofas, and walls in the house all became Li Hao's stepping stones. In the entire room, there was only Li Hao's sweaty figure moving swiftly. He returned to the starting point. His breathing became unsteady. However, he felt that he still had a little bit of energy left to do this. He didn't know what other benefits the starlight had, but it definitely made him stronger and lighter for now. In the past, Li Hao had always felt a little uncomfortable when he was acting like an ape. His body had felt heavy and every jump had tired him. He could not believe that this exercise was meant to increase his physical strength when it made him this tired. But today, he felt more relaxed. Maybe I can do it again, thought Li Hao. Li Hao looked at his belly. The starlight seemed to have dissipated, but a thin layer of it appeared on the surface of his skin. Of course, most of it had disappeared, but Li Hao felt that he was able to absorb some of it this time. Li Hao's heart raced. What exactly was this mysterious power, he wondered. Why were the night patrollers so mysterious? Li Hao pondered whether the night patrollers were really that good at fighting or if they had some special power like the jade pendant or the red shadow that was invisible to others but useful to them. Li Hao didn't think that it was just skill. Continue, he urged himself. Li Hao didn't have time to dwell on those things for now. He was very excited by the prospect that he had already finished the exercise twice and still felt like he could continue. Li Hao took a big gulp of the water in the bowl and leaped again. Upstairs, again. An old neighbor, from the 2nd floor, cursed. Li Hao liked to exercise frequently at home. Usually, the neighbors didn't mind it all that much because it only lasted a few minutes at most. But today. Did Li Hao take some kind of drug, thought the neighbor. The thumping and the banging had gone on for almost half an hour now. The soundproofing in the building was not very effective. Even if that kid was the patrol officer, the aunties from the 2nd floor would have to scold him if he didn't stop soon. Bang! After a few rounds of practice, he took a break and drank some more water. He then continued with his exercise. This time, Li Hao didn't stop after 2 tries. He persisted. When the water from the bowl was gone, Li Hao fell to the ground, exhausted. He didn't think he could ever get up from the floor again. It wasn't good to take in large mouthfuls of air right after training. So, he tried to adjust his breathing slowly. If he breathed in too fast, all the benefits from the last exercises would be wasted. Phew, Li Hao lay there trying to calm his breathing. His eyes lit up with joy. 9 times. His heart soared. It was not 9 consecutive times. There had been breaks in between. The 5 times that his professor had accomplished had been done non-stop. So, Li Hao did not really break his teacher's record. But Li Hao was nonetheless happy because he had done a triple combo at one point which had lasted 9 minutes. And, he still had the energy to do it again after that. That was scary. This water is holy water. Li Hao gasped. Is it possible that both the night patrollers and the Red Shadow used something like this to strengthen themselves? It was the first time he had done something like this, but he felt that the effect of the water was far better than he had imagined. His physical strength had increased significantly. If those people were to train like this persistently, their strength would be terrifying by normal standards, thought Li Hao. I might have underestimated the night patrollers. If these people exercised like this every day without fail, could they even be hit by the Vortex Mk3? Chapter 18. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Book of Five Beasts, 4, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. It was almost impossible. The effective range of the third generation vortex, specifically Vortex Mk3, was only 50 meters. If the opponent was more than 50 meters away, Li Hao wouldn't be able to target them at all. Hell, if they were within 50 meters, they could easily break his neck before Li Hao could shoot if they trained with mysterious power every day. So, firearms might actually prove to be useless, thought Li Hao. Li Hao was now anxious. A gun as a weapon might not be useful at all, especially against the Red Shadow. He looked at his jade pendant at the bottom of the bowl and picked it up. His eyes were filled with desire and curiosity. Is there a limit to how many times I can soak it in water? Wondered Li Hao. Can I make the magical water every time I want? If there was no limit, then Li Hao could drink it every day. But he was reluctant. The starlight energy might not be infinite. Li Hao wanted to examine it a bit more. He frowned and looked at the clock on the wall. It was already 8 o'clock. He had to go out. He wanted to go to Zhang Yuan's house to see if he could find some clues there. If he didn't go, he might not have the time or the opportunity to visit the residence again. Besides, he was being watched already. He needed to check if the saber-shaped stone was at Zhang Yuan's house. If the Starry Sky Sword has such an ability, what kind of supernatural power does the Zhang family's stone have? Li Hao was getting surer than ever that the Red Shadow was after these heirlooms. Li family's sword, Zhang family's saber. If the heirloom is what it is after, then the Zhang family's saber might already be taken. It might not be at the house. But it was hard to say. What if the Red Shadow hadn't really gotten hold of the stone saber? He had seen it before. It didn't look very extraordinary. It just looked like a normal stone. After his parents passed away, Zhang Yuan hadn't really cared about the stone. What if he had thrown it away? If the saber-shaped stone wasn't there, then maybe people are still watching Zhang Yuan's house, thought Li Hao, anxiously. He would have to find it soon. But he was afraid that it might not be entirely safe for him to go to Zhang Yuan's house alone. Should he go or should he not? Li Hao made a decision. He would go. He had to. He decided to take every safety precaution he could think of. He already had a plan. It would be better if he found the saber easily enough. With the saber and his jade sword, he will have increased chances of overcoming the Red Shadow. Li Hao went to shower first. Soon, he walked out of the bathroom and got ready. He wore the jade pendant again and hid the gun in his inner shirt pocket. He got ready to leave. He hesitated and looked back at Black Panther, who was still lying on the ground. "Come on. You have a sharp nose and I need your help." Black Panther was a dog after all. If someone followed Li Hao, maybe Black Panther could alert him. Woof. Black Panther wagged its tail and trotted towards the door. Li Hao smiled and patted its head. "You seem to have become so much smarter. It's like you understand my every word. If you sense anyone following me, don't bark. Just nudge me on my foot or bite my pants. I will understand." "All right." Black Panther actually nodded. The dog wagged its tail fiercely and bit Li Hao's pants to indicate that it understood him. Li Hao laughed. Good dog. Black Panther seemed to have high intelligence now. It was like those trained dogs at the inspection office use sometimes for investigations. Black Panther might actually be able to help Li Hao. Patting Black Panther on the head, Li Hao went over his plan in his head, preparing for possible dangers. He then left the house with Black Panther. Time to visit Zhang Yuan's house. Chapter 19. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Acting is the real strength. 1. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The sky was already dark. Zhang Yuan's house was not in the Qiming community. It was located on an old street outside the community. When he was young, Li Hao had frequently visited the old streets to play. With the redevelopment of the Silver City, a part of the old streets had been demolished. The vendors and hawkers had left from the streets. Gradually, the old streets were abandoned. There were only a few people who were occasionally seen there. Most of the residents had moved away from the old streets. Even the Qiming community was dead. Silent without them. As Li Hao walked through the street, he saw some old houses by the side. Some of those houses still had their lights on, which seemed strange to him. Li Hao felt like he should have waited a little bit longer and drank some jade pendant water to strengthen himself before embarking here. However, he hadn't had much time. The longer this dragged on, the more dangerous it would become. If he had drank the water, he would have had more strength and stamina, but he didn't think it would have been of help against the red shadow. Li Hao had come to Zhang Yuan's house for only one purpose. To see if the saber-shaped stone was still there. If it was, that would be pleasant news for Li Hao. If he didn't find it there, it would mean either the red shadow or the people following him had taken it already. Which would also mean that they knew about Li Hao's jade sword and were planning to snatch it away. Black Panther followed Li Hao silently. In the dark, the puppy was almost invisible. Li Hao's footsteps were loud on the silent street. He remained calm. He could see an old house in front of him. There was a seal on the door. Zhang Yuan's house. He felt something was wrong. Black Panther hadn't warned him yet, but he knew. When he neared Zhang Yuan's house, Li Hao took out his communicator and dialed a number. The communicator emitted a faint light in the dark and illuminated Li Hao's face. Beep, 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 there was a click and a rough voice answered. It's late, Li Hao. What is it? Let me guess, you have thought it through and can't stay in the inspection office any longer. So, you want to come back to the academy. Is that it? His voice sounded so loud in the silence that it spread across the street. Li Hao, who had felt a little scared, now felt at ease. Professor, he said in a polite voice. It's nothing like that. Then why the hell did you call? Said the angry voice from the other end. Professor, I have been investigating Zhang Yuan's case for the past year. I have found something. His death might not have been an accident. What? Li Hao's voice was calm, but it contained a certain sort of ferocity. I have done some research. Zhang Yuan wasn't the sole victim in the Silver City. There were several people who suffered the same thing. None of them seemed to be related, but there was something connecting them all. The voice at the other end did not respond. Li Hao had already reached the door of Zhang Yuan's house by now. Looking at the broken seal, he whispered, "I am in Zhang Yuan's neighborhood. I came to visit his house. I want to see if I can find more clues that can prove that he was murdered." "Li Hao," said the man from the other end of the communicator. "I know about Zhang Yuan's matter. If this is a murder, then don't go there alone. Don't be rash. What if something happens to you? Just wait a moment. I will inform the inspection office and the academy so somebody can come get you if you need help." Li Hao said nothing further. Professor Yuan understood something as he urged Li Hao to not go alone. If Li Hao had suddenly called him at the door of Zhang Yuan's house, it meant that he already knew he was in danger. He was reaching out for someone intimidating who had influence. He didn't need Professor Yuan to do or say anything. Li Hao had intended to just establish the fact to whoever was watching that he was in league with someone as famous as Professor Yuan. As long as he was connected to the professor, it was enough to deter anyone. And if Li Hao died, Professor Yuan would look for the one who killed him. It was rumored that Li Hao and Yuan Shua had a falling out. On this night, anyone watching would know that was not true. If anything happened to Li Hao, the Silver City Ancient Academy and the inspection office both would be involved. Li Hao just needed to establish that much. Black Panther bit Li Hao's pants. Li Hao turned around but found nothing unusual. But he knew that the dog was much more sensitive. If it had sensed danger, then Li Hao didn't want to doubt its instinct. There really was someone watching him. Li Hao's heart pounded. He didn't know if this meant that Zhang Yuan's saber-shaped stone was still somewhere in the house. Professor Yuan was still speaking from the communicator. Li Hao quickly smiled. "It's all right, Professor. It's not that serious. I called you just to inform you on the matter. Oh, I have also accepted a mission from the inspection office. In a few days, I will be with the team accompanying you on your expedition." Chapter 20. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Acting is the real strength. 2. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, Q. Professor Yuan seemed surprised. He let out a laugh. "All right, I will meet you soon then. It just so happens that the expedition is a little complicated. You learned from me for 2 years but never got the chance to apply yourself. How about you treat this as a practical session? If you do well, I might grant you the status of a supernumerary student. Although there are many rules at the academy and it might be hard to accomplish, if you perform well, I can still let you graduate. You should know already that if you have a graduation certificate, you can advance 2 levels from where you are now at the inspection office. You will be a level 1 patrol officer. Bright future ahead, kiddo." Li Hao smiled. "Professor, let's talk about it when we meet again. I am going to go into Zhang Yuan's house and see if there are any more clues. If I manage to get to the bottom of this, I will find a way to return to the academy and make you proud." "All right," said Professor Yuan. "If you need anything, call me anytime. There is nothing in this world that can't be solved. If the inspection office and the academy ignore it, your old professor still has some influence. You just make me proud, all right. I will go all out if you need my help. I still know many experts who can help with the case." Li Hao felt touched by Professor Yuan's words. He knew what his professor meant. He would always be there if needed. Li Hao had never talked so much with his professor in the past. He had kept his distance because he didn't want anyone to blow up another rumor and trouble his old professor. To hear his professor believe him when he said Zhang Yuan's death might not be an accident gave Li Hao hope and strength to continue with his own investigation. Li Hao couldn't call Professor Yuan every time for help. The old professor did have experience and influence, but he has a high status. He couldn't be seen getting involved with Li Hao's case. What Li Hao had started wasn't official, after all. It was a private matter and he didn't want to put anyone else in danger. I will remember that, Professor. Thank you. Li Hao cut the communication. He tore off the seal and pushed the door open to the house that had been closed for a year. When Li Hao entered the old, dusty house with Black Panther, the silence was deafening. In the darkness of the street, a hidden pair of blue eyes looked back. Under the sky, a black figure blended with night. The figure was shrouded in black except the cold, blue eyes. The person wore a ghost-like mask that covered the whole face. It was unknown whether they were a man or a woman. Li Hao, Zhang Yuan's classmate and best friend. A second-grade student of the Silver City Ancient Academy. After Zhang Yuan's death last year, he dropped out of school and joined the inspection office. Today, he reported to Wang Jia about the 6 immolation cases. They wanted to deal with it together. Li Hao's information flashed through the black figure's mind. When Li Hao had dropped out of the Silver City Ancient Academy and joined the inspection office, he was already being watched. That wasn't all. Li Hao might be the key figure in these cases. However, this matter wasn't under the Black Shadow's jurisdiction. The Black Shadow had been informed that Li Hao shouldn't be touched for now and that he could be useful. Was Li Hao just talking to Yuan Shua, thought the Black Shadow. Yuan Shua, Patriarch of the Silver City Ancient Academy and the head of the Department of Ancient Civilization. He worked with the night patrollers and was a big shot in the entire Silver City. The only one who could contact the night patrollers as he pleased. Even if no one had informed me, Li Hao couldn't be touched with a person like that backing him, thought the Black Shadow and approached the Zhang family's old house. The Black Shadow wanted to find out why Li Hao had visited the place. For clues. Zhang Yuan had self-immolated and died in the academy. What clues could there be at home? Or was he looking for something else? The Black Shadow didn't know. But it had been tasked with keeping an eye on anyone who approached the Zhang family residence. Black Panther made low guttural noises in its throat. It bit Li Hao's trousers again. It looked anxious. It seemed to be saying something. Li Hao remained calm but he was on high alert. Was someone approaching, wondered Li Hao. He wondered if his conversation with Professor Yuan would be enough to discourage people from harming him. Li Hao gently patted Black Panther's head. He then looked at the interior of the Zhang family's house. Li Hao was in the small courtyard right inside the gate. He proceeded inside. There were 2 bedrooms on either side. One used to be Zhang Yuan's. There was the kitchen. Li Hao was very familiar with the place. He had frequently visited his friend when they were both children. After Li Hao's parents passed away, he had spent his time here more often. This time, he was here to look at the Zhang family's stone table. He glanced around the house. No one seemed to have entered the house, at least at a glance. The things were all where they used to be. But Li Hao knew instinctively that they had been touched. Other than Zhang Yuan himself, Li Hao was probably the most familiar with this house. The old tree in the courtyard had been tampered with. Somebody had done a good job of making it look like it used to be, but Li Hao could see that the area around the base had been dug up and put together. If the saber is still here, it is definitely not in the main room or the second bedroom, Li Hao ascertained. Li Hao was sure of it because he and Zhang Yuan had ransacked those rooms many times. He had never seen the stone there. He knew the Zhang family house like the back of his hands. The last time I saw the saber-shaped stone was when Uncle Zhang hit Zhang Yuan. I remember that he threw it on the ground very casually after that. I don't know if he picked it up again. Li Hao tried to recall the past. He vaguely remembered that Zhang Yuan had taken the stone out of some obscure corner in the house to begin with.